The call came just after sunset. Her voice was a thin thing, all hiccups and breath, the kind that sounds twice as small over phone. "Dad," she said, "his friends are here. They're betting on me." I felt the room tilt in a way I'd never felt before. The ordinary morning light replaced by something cold and precise. I drove without thinking, the city lights streaking past like warnings I'd ignored for too long. When I arrived, the porch was lit by a single bare bulb. Laughter leaked through the door, careless and sharp. Inside, a circle of men sat with beers and smirks, eyes bright with the ugly thrill of a game. My daughter sat on the arm of the couch, hands clenched in her lap, cheeks wet and stubborn. Across from her, the man she'd been seeing. The kind of man who thinks charm excuses everything. Offered an embarrassed smile that didn't reach his eyes. The bet was stupid, cruel. How long until she gave in? How easily they could humiliate someone for sport. It wasn't the money. It was a calculation, the contempt disguised as bravado. I don't remember greeting them. I remember two things. The way my daughter watched me, as if measuring whether I was a story she'd been told about or a man she could call on, and the sudden, strange calm that settled in my chest. I sat down as if I'd always been there. I asked a question that sounded like a test and wasn't, "Who started this?" A silence fell, the kind that makes people uncomfortable because it gives them room to feel small. I stood there, letting the silence stretch. One of them, the tallest, shifted in his seat and muttered something about a joke, about just messing around. I nodded slowly, as if hearing them for the first time. My daughter's eyes were on me, wide and cautious, seeking permission to breathe. I told them plainly that this wasn't a joke, not in my house, not with my daughter. Every word was measured, calm, deliberate, no yelling, no threats, just a weight of certainty. Then I made them understand the cost. Not in violence, not in shouting, but in a reckoning they wouldn't forget. They were going to pay, not only for the audacity, but for the message it carried. The bets, the laughter, the casual cruelty. It had to end. One by one, I detailed what they owed. The tall one tried to scoff, tried to wave it off, but the look in my eyes told him he wasn't negotiating. I saw the disbelief, the realization that fun had a price when you measured against something real, something they couldn't buy or bluff through. And my daughter, she began to relax. The fear in her shoulders eased, replaced by a quiet awe. She hadn't asked me to intervene, hadn't begged for it, but I knew it was my role, my responsibility. There was a strange satisfaction in that quiet dominance, the kind that doesn't humiliate but teaches. By the time I left, the circle had shifted. Smirks were gone. Conversations had dulled. The lesson had settled in like dust. Some things you can't mock, some people you can't use, and some consequences are heavier than money or bravado. They paid, but not in the way the tall one first imagined. I made them strip the night's bravado down to its accounting. Apologies said out loud, names attached to actions. Phones turned over and any videos deleted in front of me. I had them promise to their faces they would never speak about my daughter again the way boys trade trophies. Then I set a price they could not laugh off. Not cash to soothe the bruised ego, but a deadened presence. Volunteer hours at the shelter where she worked. Showing up and doing the work that real people do, listening to the very women they'd imagine as a game. Each hour was a quiet tally against a moment of cruelty. They scoffed at first, then the scoff thinned into an awkward compliance. When the deed was done, when the last video was erased and the last reluctant promise made, the tallest tried to reclaim his smirk. I looked at him and said nothing. My silence did the job my words had already started. It was cleaner that way. The absence of fight, the shame of having to show up where they'd once sneered. They left with their heads a fraction lower. The world had not been bent into a lesson for them. It had only nudged them into seeing themselves from someone else's eyes. My daughter stood in the doorway as they left. She was wiping at her cheeks, but the fear had been replaced by something steadier, a small, incredulous relief. She hugged me then, quick and whole, like an apology without words. Later, over coffee, she said, "I thought I was ruined." I told her she was not. That ruin is a story you let happen or a story you refuse. She looked at me like she was measuring who I had been and who I could be, and for the first time in days she laughed. Soft, surprise, a sound that seemed to promise recovery rather than pity. I drove home slower than I had come. The city lights were no longer streaks, but steady markers. I thought about the barter we live with, dignity for respect, silence for safety. I thought about how small cruelties accumulate into a culture that teaches young men to wager on someone else's pain. I promised myself then to teach my daughter a sharper lesson than any payment I could collect from them. How to lead before the game begins. How to choose people who place value on the whole of you, not just the thrill of acquiring another's suffering.